is clearly a hard act to follow. And someone just said, good luck. That's fake. I'm Marcia Jones, the Associate Superintendent with the district, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker, Mr. David Griffith. He's the Director of Public Policy for ASCD, one of the premier educational organizations in the world today. Educational policy continues to be a hot topic at the state and national level, and as educators, we often find ourselves the recipient of policy changes having had no voice in the process. ASCD recognized this dilemma and created an advocacy model that promotes research-based decision-making and best practice solutions while keeping the interests of the whole child at the center of their positions. David Griffith leads ASCD's efforts to influence educational policy and legislation. His work includes convening educators from across the nation to give input and insight to the issues of the day while preparing the legislative agenda. His work has made powerful inroads in the recent debates linked to educational policy and the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. Additionally, he's been part of the ASCD leadership team with the implementation of Common Core state standards. David came to ASCD with a lot of practical experience. He was the Director of Governmental and Public Affairs for the National Association of State Boards of Education. He's been on the Hill, as they say in Washington, as an aide to Representatives Joe Coulter and Robert Torricelli. He has worked on numerous political campaigns, and he was the legislative and grassroots coordinator for the American Arts Alliance, representing the nation's leading nonprofit art institutions. Today, David is going to share his DC perspective on three important topics: the current status of reauthorization of ESEA, or in No Child Left Behind, the current status of sequestration, which may have a financial impact on our district, and the current status of Common Core state standards development. Please give a warm Springdale welcome to Mr. David Griffith.
I'd like to thank Dr. Marcia Jones for the invitation and Dr. Rollins for the opportunity to speak with you here today at your back to school. But now I'm starting to realize they put the outsider in right after that act and Dr. Rollins, and now I'm kind of understanding why I'm in the where I am in the agenda. But a couple things before I start. Obviously, this crowd is rather large. So what I've done, or what we've done back at headquarters, I'm going to be referencing some resources and some materials that you might be interested in, and we've put it in a very easy to remember URL for you. So I'm going to show some screenshots here over the course of my presentation, but if you go to ascd.org/Springdale, you'll be able to download all of the links that I talk about here today. They're all free, and I encourage you not only to use them, but to share them with your colleagues as well. So the first order of business, I think, is the No Child Left Behind Act, or what now people in Washington are calling the Elementary and Secondary Education Act reauthorization. And when I go anywhere around the country, educators are always asking, what's up with NCLB? When are we going to get replace the law and get something that's actually going to be working for students and schools and teachers? And I have kind of good news and bad news. The good news is, in the past year, we've made more progress than we've ever made in replacing NCLB. The bad news is that we're still not at that finish line. The Senate Education Committee actually passed a bill on a bipartisan vote. The House Education Committee passed a bill, but that's as far as it's gotten. It has not gone to the floor of the Senate. It has not gone to the floor of the U.S. House. And let me show you actually. That's the Springdale resource page right there. And this is, I think, a good overview for those of you. I saw a lot of new teachers here, and even some veterans that maybe were not around 10 years ago when NCLB was enacted, and the profound change that wrought in your practice in your classroom and in your school and in the Springdale district. but it kind of gives a history of what's going on and kind of where we're going from here. Now, I had been kind of a happy optimist that even though we had gotten these bills out of committee, that we would be kind of close to the finish line. But even I now am becoming more pessimistic and skeptical. I thought maybe after the November elections, during a lame duck session, they'd be able to kind of get this taken care of. But apparently, there are too many other big decisions and big ticket items like the expiration of the Bush-era tax cuts, the issue of sequestration I'll talk about in a little bit, perhaps even needing to raise the national debt ceiling again, that are just going to kind of push out any other issues, any other debates about any other issues, including education. And that's really kind of disappointing because as far as progress moving forward, things have been stalled, and they'll be stalled indefinitely. If President Obama were to win re-election, you might be able to see a NCLB replacement in 2013. If Governor Romney is to win the election, that timeline is probably at least another year out. So you're looking at least 2014, if not longer, just by the sheer fact of having to select a Secretary of Education, staff up a U.S. Department of Education with all the kind of lower-level officials and appointees. And really, in the first year, I don't foresee education being a top priority of a Romney administration. So the bad news is, if it doesn't happen soon, it's not going to happen for a while. The especially frustrating thing is right now, and why we can't make any, I don't know why we can't make more progress. Republicans and Democrats are not that far apart in how they kind of want to fix things. If you think of the pendulum of NCLB, it shifted all the way over to a lot of federal control, very prescriptive about how you measure student achievement, about how you hold schools accountable, about the improvement efforts. That pendulum has really swung back in the proposals to replace NCLB. And both Republicans and Democrats are much more focused on devolving a lot more of that authority down to the state and district level. You see it in testing, and now they would keep the regimen of testing in grades 3 through 8 in reading and math, but really giving the states the opportunity to decide what their standards are, what tests they would use, how they would measure, again, student accountability and school accountability, and also giving states and districts wide latitude in how they would, in how schools and districts would be able to choose the interventions to improve the lowest performing of the schools. The two sticking points between Republicans and Democrats, and again, they're not that far off, is what you do with the very lowest performing schools and students. Democrats really want a very prescriptive, very specific set of interventions that schools and districts would have to use. Republicans just consider that leaving it up to the states and districts to decide for themselves. The kind of interesting twist in all this is that when it comes to teacher evaluations and measuring educator effectiveness, the roles are reversed. Democrats prefer allowing states and districts to determine how to measure, how to define, how to identify teachers that are effective, and it is actually the Republicans that want to be very prescriptive in telling states and districts how exactly educators should be measured for their job performance, and then kind of what the criteria are to either improve their craft or remove them from the classroom. And here we've got this handy dandy, if you're so inclined, a comparison chart of the two bills that are out there right now: the Senate bill, which is basically the Democratic bill, and the House bill, which is the Republican bill, and it lists kind of the key provisions, again, under standards, assessments, accountability, teacher evaluation, school improvement, what the differences are, so you can kind of gauge and see what's going on and how this might impact you. It will be in all likelihood, the starting point for discussions next year in the next Congress. Now, one wild card I want to throw out there are obviously the pending 2012 elections. We saw in 2010 an influx of some very conservative members, particularly of the members of the Tea Party. Not a great many, but a vocal minority that are really kind of questioning the role of the federal role in education. And that's kind of complicated things moving forward. Depending on how the elections go and how congressional, who wins the congressional elections, the concern is that we are going to move away from a discussion or debate about how to fix or replace NCLB and have a much more general discussion about the federal role in education, so that the issue isn't not necessarily replacing NCLB, but outright elimination of it. The other big problem with this stalled nature of ESEA is that it's the 800-pound gorilla. It really so much of it kind of infiltrates into different other areas like special education, like career technical education, and so it's kind of blocking everything else in the queue, and the federal government isn't going to be taking on reforms or improvements to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act or the Perkins Career Technical Education Program, which are all coming up for renewal until they are able to kind of dispatch ESEA. And again, the prospects for that look somewhat dim. I also want to talk briefly about the NCLB waivers. I know Arkansas recently received a waiver to get out from some of the more onerous provisions of NCLB. And there's kind of this, again, kind of good news, bad news part of this. It's good that you were able to, or states have been granted waivers, get out from the more onerous provisions of NCLB, and the biggest being that 2013-2014 deadline where all students, 100% of students, need to be proficient in reading and math. Paradoxically, because that deadline has been pushed back, made more flexible, it has really reduced the sense of urgency in Washington to, again, replace NCLB and kind of put something else, substitute it. I would also say that I appreciate why the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, and the U.S. Department of Education did what they did. I think they did it with the best of intentions, again, as a relief valve for schools and for districts like Springdale. I think the way they did it, I think, is going to come back to haunt them and educators. Clearly, the waiver provisions that were in No Child Left Behind never envisioned issuing waivers in the way the Secretary has done them, in a kind of a quid pro quo fashion, where you get out from some statutory requirements in exchange for adhering to some of their new priorities. I think that's going to come back to bite everybody in the future with new administrations, be it a second Obama administration, a Romney administration, or Democrat or Republican presidents moving forward, because the precedent has been set to move unilaterally with executive action in imposing their education priorities on schools and districts outside of the legislative process and without congressional approval. And again, it's just so frustrating in Washington because while Congress is seeing their power usurped, they, in typical congressional fashion, have been unable to do anything about it and have just kind of not acted in any way. They've complained about it, but it hasn't spurred them to action to actually start moving these bills through the legislative process. The second issue I want to talk about is funding, and you all probably know. How many of you are familiar with this term sequestration and the budget cuts that are coming here in the near future? Okay, well, sequestration is a real fancy Washington word for Indian giver, or a clawback or a give back. I won't go into the long history of it, other than to say it was the brainchild of congressional leaders last year when they couldn't come to a compromise on the debt ceiling limit. And what they decided to do, the long story short, is they triggered this process that is going to take effect on January 2nd, 2013. And it's going to result in an across-the-board cut of 8.4% to just about every federal program, education included, also defense activities, science, transportation, just about everything but Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. But even they there's some cuts there that are not made to recipients, but to the program to institutions and hospitals. It's going to impact fortunately, we just got news. It's not going to impact your current school year budget, the 2012-2013 year, but it will take effect at in next summer, 2013-2014 school year. So it's going to impact Title I, Title II, impact aid, IDEA, Perkins funding, and it's going to be an across-the-board 8.4% cut. We've got about 4 months to stop this and to overturn this. Congress can overturn it or repeal it with an act of Congress and with the president's signature. And this is kind of one of these looming big funding decisions that's going to happen after the elections. And I would encourage you to contact your members of Congress about this, because if it takes effect, even though the impact won't be felt till the next school year for you, it will be very hard to undo once it goes into effect. And I know if Springdale and Arkansas are like the other states and districts I've visited with, your budgets have already been cut at the local and state level, and to pile on almost a 10% cut of federal funding, there really is there's just no more fat. I mean, you're into bone at this point, and it's going to have significant consequences. We've got a sequestration page, which I would encourage you to go to. It's got a calculator where you can input the funding that you receive from federal programs and see what the cut is going to be for your school system. It will it gives you some background on the issue of sequestration and allows you to contact your members of Congress. It would be very helpful. We're talking in very big numbers. I mean, you're talking hundreds of billions, even trillions of dollars, and it's not almost, it's like Everett Dirksen said, a billion here, a billion there, and then you're really talking about real money. The key is to really let lawmakers know what the local impact, put a face on what these cuts are really going to mean for teachers and students, be it layoffs, be it program cutbacks, be it reduced services to students, to really kind of make it real to them and put a personal face with what's going to happen, because at a very high level, it's easy to talk about these numbers, but it just doesn't mean anything, doesn't resonate. Beyond that, and another reason why we've got to overturn sequestration, is because we're now in a very, and you know this as well at the state level, a very tight fiscal environment. There's not a lot of new money to go around. The current budget there's just really no fat in it. There are no increases in sight for federal education funding. We've enjoyed a couple increases the past couple of years. We had some stimulus money, but holding the line and not suffering cutbacks is going to be a major accomplishment. In fact, after sequestration, after the 8.4% cut were to come to pass, the next year would see about a 5% cut in education funding as well. So again, it's just further squeezing us. Again, I would just say, when you hear about the presidential debates and you hear about kind of these budget considerations, keep in mind it's a very static playing field right now. All the focus, all the consideration is on cutting spending and the assumption that there is no new money, because some people don't want to consider increasing revenue, and that's the only way to increase the pie, is to kind of stave off some of these cuts. So I would urge you to kind of take a look at that as well. The Common Core. ASCD is a endorsing partner of the Common Core. We're very proud of that fact. There's no denying that the Common Core has been an incredible success, well beyond what anyone, the project leaders, could have ever envisioned. I will tell you, it's with 46 states that have adopted the Common Core, it is about 3 times as many states in half the time that the project leaders thought they would get. They thought they would get about 15 states to adopt these standards in the first 3 years, and they have exceeded all expectations. You may have attended, we had ASCD hosted a Common Core Summit in Little Rock last October in partnership with our affiliate Arkansas ASCD and the Arkansas Department of Education. Just a show of hands, was anybody able to attend that one? We had about 500 educators from around the state. So we got off to a good start, and like I said, it's been a great success so far. I would just caution you, and I've cautioned the leaders that we work with about this, that the Common Core is off to a great start, but there are still a lot of challenges ahead. I think of the Winston Churchill quote that we're not at the end, we're not even at the beginning of the end, rather we're at the end of the beginning. There is still a lot of work to be done. The adoption and this first stage of awareness has been critically important, but there are still a lot of ways this thing can go sideways. There's still a tremendous amount of lack of public awareness about what the standards are and what they mean. I was in my hotel room last night watching channel 2049, I think. Is that the local one here? And is it 49? 43, channel 43, and the news came on, and there was a real brief mention of, hey, school's starting next week, and your kids are going to be learning a new curriculum, and there's going to be some new standards, and they're going to be learning in different ways, and they'll be a little bit more rigorous. Meanwhile, in sports. And that's kind of the way things have gone. I think in large part it's because two things. I think the states adopted these things so quickly. There was not a lot of public awareness, a lot of public input about it. And I also think standards themselves are very esoteric for parents. Again, as I go around the country, parents can't tell you what's in the standards. They can tell you what's on the test. They can't name the standards. They can't, I'd be surprised if they said the Common Core, but they can tell you in Illinois that it's the Prairie State exam and they know what's on it, or they can tell you about in Missouri, the Show Me assessments, and they know what's on those. So this is not going to be real to them for a couple more years when these assessments come online. And getting public buy-in and getting public awareness about what's coming down the pike is going to be hugely critical. The changes in instruction, and also preparing them for what the test scores might show, or how bad, they might be. The other issue is the concerns of educators. We've done a year-long initiative to bring awareness to the standards to educators, but they've got a number of very valid concerns that I think need to be addressed as things move forward. There's a lot of moving parts, and these things are moving very fast. You've got kind of this dual-track system here in Arkansas, as in other states, where you've got your current standards and your current tests, but you're also being asked to overlay the Common Core on a lot of this, and also you've got these looming the park assessments coming down the pike, and no one's really sure kind of what they're going to look like or what they're going to mean. These assessments are going to be used for NCLB accountability, presumably NCLB accountability. NCLB requirements will still be in place in 2014, 2015. You've also got this combination also kind of overlaying everything else is a new teacher evaluation system. Again, measuring effectiveness based on these new standards and these new tests. We still haven't, and I say we, nationally, been able to really identify, these are supposed to be college and career readiness standards, and it's still not clear what the definition of college and career readiness is, especially the career part. The college is getting a little bit better. It's about, kind of successfully completing a first freshman year core of courses in college, but the tests are going to be, it's going to be hard to determine. They're still working it out at what level of proficiency you would be, or what level of readiness you would be for college, and what that entails. And also, again, this goes back to the parental part. These are going to be, the way colleges are going to use these tests, that I think they're going to, these tests are going to be much higher stakes for students than they've ever experienced before. And again, begs the question about getting out in front of this about parents and what's coming down the pike. The testing consortia, the PARC, is the one operating here in Arkansas. They're developing the tests. These are very ambitious, very sophisticated tests. You've probably been doing a lot of work about the technology assessment of what it's going to take to administer these computer-based assessments in your schools. There's a lot of promise, but there's also a lot of fear. And, this hasn't often been communicated. I don't know if you know this, but everyone talks about these computer-based assessments, but really the grades 3 through 5 tests are going to be paper and pencil for the foreseeable future until they're able to kind of offer some validity about students at that age keyboarding and taking the tests online. and even the bandwidth and what that, if that's going to be sustainable. But the park timeline of piloting testing this year, field testing next year, and then a complete administration 2014-2015 means that the de facto implementation for the Common Core is really at that point, 2014-2015. So I know it's a tight timeline. There's a lot of work still to be done, and we want to help you as much as possible. Let me just offer a couple opportunities. Again, parental communication about the new standards, what this entails for learning, the shift about persuasive and argumentative writing, and text complexity. I would encourage you to start thinking about how to leverage the Common Core for reforms you want to initiate in your schools. Kind of like NCLB allowed states that really wanted to start disaggregating data and focusing on the achievement gaps, gave them the rationale to do that. I think the Common Core all presents some opportunities for you all to say, hey, we want to do things a little differently because of these new standards, and to do that. From ASCD's perspective, we think a whole child approach to education is the way to go in making those reforms. If we continue to do the same old stuff, I say the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. I think we're setting ourselves up for failure if we think we're going to institute higher expectations for students and continue to deliver an education the same manner we've been doing over the years. And it's not going to bode well for students. Certainly not going to bode well for students. It's also not going to bode well for teachers or for schools. So we need to think about how to change what we're doing and how to deliver that instruction. So I know you've got this 2014-2015 deadline, this de facto implementation staring you down. But I would encourage you to thinking kind of beyond that as well. I know you've got a lot of near-term stuff, but start thinking intermediate, long-term about the changes you want to initiate, that you want to take root, because the long-term success of the Common Core is not going to be in 2014-2015. It's going to be what happens in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. That will really tell whether the Common Core has the staying power or not. I want to mention one particular resource we're very proud of and we just released, and that's our Common Core page, ascd.org/Common Core. It's got a wealth of information about what's going on with the assessments, the consortia, resources for educators. We've got a newsletter that goes out talking about instructional practices, but we've also got that's our whole child intersection with the Common Core. But we've just launched in the past 10 days a new professional development tool aligned to the Common Core, based in part on the input we got from Arkansas educators at our summit we hosted in Little Rock last October. And it's got lesson plans, it's got videos of model instruction, it's got other resources to help you teach the Common Core. Now, it's only English language, arts, and math at the moment. I know the Common Core has some connections to these other subjects. We're not there just yet. And it's only, as of right now, applicable to grades 6 through 12. But I would encourage you to take a look at it, check it out. It is free. You do have to register, and you don't need to be an ASCD member. If you're an ASCD member, you can just register your membership ID. If not, you need to create a username and a password. And that's because it allows you to kind of have a journal and to put notes in and to share information. And I'll give you that. I want to give you this website address specifically. It's also on the Springdale resource page, but it's educore, educore.ascd.org, and I would encourage you to check it out. So, a couple final thoughts. I know as you go into the school year, what I've said is just basically telling you things are very unsettled in the immediate future. And that's just the way it is, not only with the policy of things, but also the politics. And things will probably shake out this fall in November with the elections, but also even after that in January, we'll see where we're headed. There are competing interests out there. There is like I said, a shrinking funding pie. There are, more and more people at the table and less of the pie to go around. And educators need to be out there, making the case for their fair share of the investments that will lead to prosperity for this country years from now. There are new education reform constituencies out there. There are new players all over the place. You've got Students First. You've got Stand for Students. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but it just adds to the cacophony of information. There are, everyone agrees. There's a real general consensus about what's broken or what needs to be fixed with NCLB. The problem is there are huge differences on what the solutions are to get at those problems. And if it were easy, it would have been done by now. You've got the Common Core implementation that continues to move apace. And we want to help you as much as possible on that and make it as painless as possible for you. But really what I want to leave you with is the importance of your involvement in all of these issues. As Marcia said, ASCDs, my unit, was created at ASCD in the post No Child Left Behind era when our members realized that we needed to be much more involved in what was going on in education because what was finally happening in Washington was having a very direct impact on what was going on in the classroom. And really, I think you can make the case that what the flaws with NCLB could have been avoided or at least ameliorated had educators had more input into the development of NCLB. And so I think that's one of the great lessons learned, and I would encourage you all to be more involved in this. Tell your story about what's happening with funding, what's happening in your classroom, what's happening with your students and your schools. You are the best advocates for your children. You've got a tremendous amount of expertise to share. And really, it's critically important that you help shape the policies that are going to affect your work. And I can tell you this, talking about a competing interest, if you don't do it, I guarantee you somebody else will. And I guarantee you probably won't like the result. So again, I know you do a lot of things right now, and I know you've got your day jobs, but you need to start thinking about this as part of your job. And so I can't stress that enough. Like it or not, you have to be involved with this because there are strength in numbers, and together we really can make a difference. I think we've seen this starting over the past couple of years about the direction of the debate about the need to fix NCLB. We need to kind of keep that up. And let me just say one last thing. As I said, I realize this is everything I talked about here. I know it's at the 35,000-foot level. I'm from Washington. I'm going to go back, and you're going to be in your classroom. And what you do in that classroom or in your school, it's the most important work you do that we do every day with individual students. It's really what matters most. So I want to thank you for your work and for carrying on and for doing your best to make our schools and our students the best they can be. I know there are challenges, there are problems, just like with any great enterprise like public education. And you'll hear the naysayers who love to nitpick and pick out specific examples and anomalies and outliers and kind of try to taint the whole with these kind of individual cases. But in the big scheme of things, it doesn't reflect the whole. Public education has made this community great, has made this state great. Public education has made this country great. And it's been done through classroom teachers. The public school teachers are the reason why. The public school teachers have never let us down and never will let us down. Thank you.